Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. And hopefully I don't get too emotional. I've got 2 kids, and this is not something that, again, I've talked about to anybody really in general, especially experts in their field. So before we get started, why don't you each introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, well, my name's Kevin Turner. I'm a commander with the Tallent County Sheriff's Office. I currently serve as one of the supervisors for our human trafficking child exploitation unit and serve as a task force coordinator for the Tallent County Human Trafficking Task Force. I've been with the department going on 33 years. I've been in the anti-trafficking field since 2017. That's when Sheriff Wayburn came into office and created a human trafficking online child exploitation unit, and I was tasked to create and supervise that unit, and I've been doing that ever since. So in my 33-year career, this is probably the most rewarding work I've done. So I can honestly say that. So.
And the term child exploitation, that covers all facets, not just sex trafficking as well?
Right. We do a lot of the online child exploitation, where children are being exploited online by online predators and things of that nature. So
I see. Felicia?
So I'm Felicia Tallent, and I work for the Fort Worth Police Department in the Human Trafficking Unit. And I have founded and facilitated the Stones Taskforce, which is a community network engaged in collaborative efforts to end sex trafficking in Tarrant County.
That's great. So it's a way to reach out to others and create a community.
Yes.
And so you guys work in tandem with a lot of the projects that you work on.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Would you say that's you guys? So you guys see each other every day, pretty much, for work?
We're sooner about next week, even more, because we're actually going to be moving in and officing with the Fort Worth unit. So that's even going to be better for us. So that collaboration is even going to be enhanced since.
Wow. So I want to talk about your Five Stone focuses mainly on sex trafficking or just child exploitation in general?
Sex trafficking.
Okay. And so how prevalent is sex trafficking here in the U.S. and Texas? Because, again, I mentioned that I feel like it's very much underreported in the media, and it's something that I don't see it being reported on. In fact, this video is going to go on YouTube, and for certain topics like this that are touchy, they kind of flag it. They kind of restrict it in a way that I don't understand, because I don't know if the intent is to try to protect people from reading about a sensitive subject. Like, for example, I had a couple of, the One Tribe Foundation, which focuses on suicide rates in military and first responders. And when I try to do searches on YouTube to kind of see how I should promote the video, a lot of them are kind of flagged by, you're about to read sensitive content. And so there, unfortunately, isn't as open as I would like it to be. So tell me a little bit about how prevalent it is here in the U.S. and in Texas.
It's very prevalent, and like you said, it's very underreported, and there's a lot of different reasons for that being underreported. A main portion of it is a lot of times our victims don't even realize they're victims. That's a huge issue that we're addressing on a daily basis. There's a significant amount of trauma that has incurred during their exploitation that has caused them to be bonded to their trafficker and really not look at themselves as a victim and look at that trafficker as a friend or as a romantic partner or something to that effect. But that being said, the cases that we are identifying and the victims that are being identified, it really shows the prevalence of what's happening here within the community, the North Texas community, as well as in the state and across the country. We're fortunate enough to really be in a position where we're not only able to see what's happening here locally, but across the country. The Tarrant County Human Trafficking Task Force is a federally funded task force. So we get to talk to other task forces across the country to see what it looks like. And all of them are reporting the same thing. It's prevalent, but it's significantly underreported. And, when we talk about certain things like data and things of that nature, the data around human trafficking, sex trafficking, and labor trafficking, but sex trafficking specifically, doesn't really paint an accurate picture of what it looks like. I think from our perspective, from the law enforcement side of things, what we really seen is really that paints a clearer picture is what our victim service providers are doing. The victims they are serving and how many victims are serving and to what extent. I think that really paints the clearer picture of what it looks like here locally. So
yeah, everybody wants statistics, but the statistics are highly unreliable. You can find statistics that say there's 30,000 cases of trafficking in the U.S. or 500,000 cases in the U.S. And everything in between.
Well, one I says, 313,000 trafficking. This includes 79,000 minors in sex trafficking. But like you said, it could be.
Right.
Would you say those numbers are usually underreported because of those issues?
Definitely underreported, and that those numbers are actually taken from a 2016 study that the UT Austin did, and that's pretty old. I mean, we don't have anything more recent than 2016.
Right.
So we know it's growing. It's second most profitable crime next to drugs. So it's hidden because we only see what's reported, what comes to our desk, but
I can
a lot of it
imagine,
is happening in the shadows.
That was 8 years ago. Since the large wave of immigration, too, I'm sure that plays a big role. Sex trafficking has played; those numbers have probably heavily shifted because of that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting because that is a perception that immigration is going to fuel this, but really what we're seeing from our perspective of most of our victims are domestic.
Yeah.
They're U.S. citizens that have been victimized. We know that the immigrant population is being exploited, for both sex and labor trafficking. Sure. I think what kind of prohibits us to really get a good understanding of that, again, from the law enforcement perspective, the strong stance of immigration here in Texas. The exploiters, the traffickers use that as the coercive manner to force their victims into doing forced labor and or sex trafficking. Like if you make an outcry, then I'm going to have you deported. So they use that as the nexus in what to exploit their victim. And I think because of that, that really causes that, as Felicia said, it's a very underground, but that even pushes it further underground to where we're really not seeing the true impact of it on immigrant population. But again, our victim service providers that are serving that community, they're telling us, yes, it is prevalent. But again, from what we're seeing, we don't see it overtaking what is occurring from the domestic side of things when it comes to sex trafficking. It's just doesn't show the data, that little data we have and what information we have. It doesn't show that there's a vast difference between the two groups, really. So,
wow.
Yeah, and there's a difference between smuggling and trafficking, which a lot of people are confused about, and especially the media is confused about. Smuggling is a willing decision that's made where you exchange money so that somebody can come across the border.
Sure.
But trafficking is when you're forced into some sort of labor or commercial sex. Mm-hmm. Smuggling can become trafficking.
Right.
So you might bring somebody across the border willingly, but then say, oh, now this debt is not going to go away. You have to do certain work for me. I'm going to hold your documents until you do it. That sort of thing. So it can turn into trafficking, but the two are different.
Okay, yeah, because I've read recently that there's a lot of undocumented minors who have come in and they have a sort of keeper, so to speak, who's whether it's a family member or some sort who's kind of keeping tabs on where they are, and a lot of times we're having trouble keeping track of where these children are.
Yeah.
So it's I guess at this point in time hard to tell whether or not those kids are where they are and what they're involved in.
Yeah. I mean, very much so. So.
You mentioned being essentially sold against your will. And it's a form of slavery.
It is.
And when you think about, slavery is illegal today, as we know it, and it has been for a while. And it's crazy to me that this is, like you said, the second most profitable crime or prevalent crime. Mm-hmm. You said profitable, right? Or prevalent? I'm not sure. But maybe both.
Maybe both. Yeah.
But why is it so rampant today, even though it's illegal, like on this scale? Do you have like any theories on your own? Because this is theory at this point. But my only thought is that because children in general are less able to speak for themselves, and like you said, there seems to be some relationship between the people who are exploiting these children and with them, that they're less likely to feel that it's a crime. They're being completely manipulated.
Yeah. So it's very profitable, which I think is what really drives it. Yeah. If you sell drugs, then you have to go get more drugs to sell more drugs. If you sell a person, you can sell them over and over and over again and continue to make a profit from them.
How does that work? Because if one person sold one person to another, how can they?
They sell them for acts.
I see. Okay.
So you're not actually selling a person to another person. You're renting them in a sense for a sexual act.
What age and demographic are at higher risk that are sold into sex trafficking system, and the most common ways that children and teens are sold? What are?
I don't know if would be the exact terminology. It's more of, what we see at high risk of exploitation, those that are more susceptible to being exploited. The age range, when there's been some statistics out there when they talk to survivors of sex trafficking that, when they average out the range as far as when they were first introduced into sex trafficking, whether through a trafficker or from a family member, whatever it may be. And usually it's, 13 to 15 years of age is typically the range of which, kind of been averaged out. We do see the younger children in that range that are at high risk of exploitation, especially those that are runaways that are out on the street and going into survival mode. We have children that, the families just don't have any desire or interest to, partake in that child's life, and they're left to do to their own means, whatever that may be. And then, of course, we do have the family members that are, introducing and or selling their children into trafficking for whether it be narcotics or other things.
Of that, sorry, that one's specifically horrendous to me.
Yeah.
Of that's what percentage does it? I mean, again, hard to tell, but what percentage of that of trafficking in general is done by family members who are selling their kids, getting rid of their kids like that?
Yeah, again, and those are hard statistics to actually come into play, because a lot of times we're not finding about this until the victims already recovering through their exploitation and becoming survivors. We have several survivor leaders within our organizations that are able to guide us and really have us a better understanding of the exploitation and what a actual victim goes through. But a lot of our victims, again, through the sex trafficking side of things that, were introduced through familial trafficking from a family member, a lot of it has to do with a parent or guardian that's addicted to drugs, and they're using that child to sell for drugs, whether to either drug dealer or to other individuals to make money to buy drugs. So it's like, and again, the percentages are so hard to narrow down. But when you look at and talk to survivors, a lot of them have had that situation where it's been a family member that's been, have caused the trafficking situation to occur. So,
and is it an even split between boys and girls? Typically.
And that is an interesting fact that you're bringing up there, because there is a mass undertaking right now to try to see the prevalence of boys and young men being trafficked, specifically in sex trafficking. Bob Weems with Bob House of Hope is doing a tremendous job here in the state and across the country to bring, that up to the forefront to really talk about that, because that's really a lot of things that we encounter a lot is that that's the forgotten population that we're talking about. Because when they think of sex trafficking, they think of girls and young women. They don't think of young boys and men that are being sold into that.
And the transgender community as well is very high risk.
Yeah,
really. And well, I want to expand on maybe the reasons why. You want to finish?
Well, I was going to say, there's some things out there that they believe that, the trafficking of young boys and men probably makes up close to 50% of the trafficking population. We're just not seeing that actually reflected right now because of the rarity of which a young man or a boy will make an outcry. It's very a population that does not really, again, see themselves as victims and rarely makes outcries. So.
Yeah, and like you said, the exploitation itself may not necessarily be in sex, but if you think about the disparity of, say, a parent or somebody, a drug addict who's willing to give their child up, we know statistically there's that the population is even split of women and men, males and females. So in that disparate population who are having these children, it's 50-50 boys, 50-50 girls. So you can imagine that there's just as likely to have a chance of a boy getting sold into it as a female. So can you expand on what you were saying about the trans community?
Yeah, just so a lot of them have a stigma at home. Their parents don't accept them. So there's a lot of abuse or neglect that happens in those homes. They tend to run away. And of course, the juveniles that are on the street are extremely vulnerable to trafficking. Foster care system is another highly vulnerable population. And also people with intellectual disabilities are also very vulnerable.
Like autism or usually, is that usually the main one, autism or
people who have a lower IQ
or any type of learning disability.
Learning disability.
Of the total amount of children, again, you don't have to give me stats because you might not know the exact numbers, but the total number of children that are being trafficked, how much of that is for sex trafficking specifically, and I'm sure there's some layover, overlap between the two. But is that typically what children are? Because I can't imagine, younger children to be. They can do some sort of labor to a certain extent, but is that the predominant reason for trafficking for children in children?
I would say from what we're seeing, yes, it's predominantly sex trafficking, but we do see the labor trafficking nexus, 15, 16, 17-year-olds being forced into labor, in construction sites, hospitality, and things of that nature that are really making up the bulk of the labor trafficking situation. So,
and who are the people that are, again, you mentioned parents who are essentially selling their kids into this trafficking, but how organized is this is human trafficking in Texas and across the states? Is it like more on the individual level, or does it spread out to more organized crime units?
We've seen both. So there are some groups that are organized crime. Some of the gangs get involved in trafficking, but we see a lot of individuals that are also,
which makes it way harder to target.
Yes.
Right. Because you're not going after some big ring. So as far as the examples of cases that you've gone after, that you guys have worked on, how many of these cases have been like large groups of, say, children that are, in some sort of, warehouse being, sold? Is it mostly like a case by case basis that you have to kind of go through?
So for us, when we have cases that become larger like that and have multiple players, usually we partner with the FBI and HSI, and they take over those cases.
And at what point do you do that? Like, is there, like, how organized does a crime unit have to be or crime organization have to be before you kind of have to hand it off? Like, where's the threshold?
I don't think there's a specific threshold. It's really a case-by-case basis. Clearly, the more victims, especially if it's going across state lines and things of that nature, where they're going to get involved, our federal partners are going to get involved. Again, it's a case-by-case basis. But, I mean, we have seen, like Felicia talked about, the gang activity and things like that. When a gang is looking at, how do we make money, drugs and trafficking are the two primary sources for that income to come in, for the gang. And so when you're talking about a trafficking from a gang perspective, you're going to have multiple victims. It's usually not going to just be one or two. You're going to have multiple victims that they're exploiting during that time frame. And a lot of them are maybe gang members themselves that they're exploiting. The higher ranking gang members are exploiting the lower level, gang members into, trafficking situations like that. But I from our perspective and what we've seen, most of it is the, one or two victims, but there have been a handful of cases that have gone more than that. So,
and how do you go about identifying and finding and helping these children? That's got to seem very. I mean, where do you even start?
Those are hard things, and I know Felicia can expand on this a lot more than I can because she works so closely with all the partners over there with our child advocacy centers and things of that nature. But it's really, they come out from different sources, whether it's Department of Family Protective Services, it comes across a case, or another family member reports it, and or the child is going in for maybe a medical checkup, and there's some indications that there's something going on here, and a medical professional reports it. There have been children that, of course, have made outcries to whether it be teachers or some other trusted source where they can actually confide in to identify themselves as victims. But it comes from a variety of different sources, and it's very hard because, again, it's very underreported, and it's very much a situation where a lot of the children don't believe they're victims. They believe that their trafficker is their boyfriend, right, and that they're doing this for love, and that's what they're using. So,
yeah, I agree with all that.
How do you, once you've rescued a child, how do you go about? I'm sure this probably more speaks to you. How do you go about making them understand that they've been abused and dealing with that trauma? So
we never use the word rescue. We don't swoop in and act as anybody's savior. The only thing we do is we can recover somebody from a situation. And sometimes we have to recover them multiple times because we'll recover them and then they'll go right back into it, and then we recover them again. It's similar to domestic violence, where sometimes it takes 7 times before a person can leave their abuser. We'll see that. But it takes a whole community of service providers and therapists and medical community and just advocates, everybody to kind of wrap around this person. And it takes time for them to finally come to a realization that, yes, I was a victim of a crime. Because like Commander Turner said, that trauma bond is very strong. A lot of them, this is their boyfriend. If you are in an abusive home and your parents abuse you and you're not getting anything else, it's just abuse at home, and you leave and you find somebody on the street who says, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to love you, they still abuse you, but now they're buying you clothes, they'll buy you a phone, they let you get your nails done, they tell you you're beautiful. All of a sudden it doesn't feel like abuse. It feels like love in their eyes.
Wow. Yeah. Obviously, this all starts with the parents and the family at the end of the day. I mean, I can assume that in communities where parents are more present, obviously this is just much less prevalent. Obviously, it's more in desperate, low-income areas across the state and the country. I always tell my wife this, and we've joked about this, but you need a driver's license to drive a car, but
You're right.
but you don't need one to have a kid.
Right.
And to me, this speaks to it, because it's just pure insanity. That, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't save everybody. I mean, it's hard enough. I've got 2 kids, and we're doing everything in our power to make sure that they're on the right path, and it's an everyday nonstop struggle. So,
well, I think it's the idea that it takes a village to raise a child. You need everybody, the teachers and the counselors and the parents and the neighbors, and everybody needs to be working together to try to help keep these kids safe.
Yeah.
So where are the trafficked minors usually being, held? They're in the home with their captor, essentially, right? I mean,
it varies. You know, we've seen trafficking cases where, they are living at home, and then on a weekend going to their trafficker, being exploited, then coming back home during the weekdays to go to school and make it look like a normal life. Where they're being kept, it really just, there's no real solidified fact. Like everybody wants to say, well, they're being locked away, they're being, restrained, they're being tied up and things like that. And that's not what trafficking is. Right. And that's one of the big, things that we're trying to dispel is like, trafficking doesn't require any movement. It doesn't require restraint. It doesn't require them to, be tied up or anything like that. And just like I mentioned, we have, victims that are living what appears to be a normal life, but yet they're being exploited. And those are tough situations. But I mean, victims are being recovered, from homes, hotels, a variety of different locations, and so I don't think that there's one specific area that would be more prevalent for a trafficking victim to be kept, but
right.
But it's interesting
Because mentioning that it's not an organized thing. Usually, it's just on a case by case basis. It's just people are living their lives and they're in these locations. Which I had this preconceived notion that like you said, there's these big cages where these kids are being held, and it's just not like that. It's much more deceptive and a lot more.
It's a very psychological crime.
Yes.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are. Either they're in love with their trafficker, they think that this is their boyfriend or father figure, or they're afraid to leave. A lot of times the trafficker will either abuse them or somebody near them, and they see that abuse and they're afraid that the trafficker is going to hurt them or kill their family members. And so they're afraid to leave. So they might go home during the week, but if the trafficker says, come back on Friday, then they're going to go back on Friday because they want to keep their family safe.
And of the children that you recover, how many of them are coming out of their own volition to you and looking for help versus you finding it and uncovering it?
I would say the outcries are rare,
Very rare.
And it's more of the other things, indicators that have come up that someone has noticed to bring that to attention of, whether it be,
a teacher,
Department of Family Protective Service or law enforcement, whatever it may be. And usually those are the way that those children are being recovered, identified, and recovered. Again, it's a rarity that they're making outcries. And as Felicia had mentioned, it sometimes, we can talk to the same child over and over and over again, and there'd never be an outcry, and they may never make an outcry until they're actually going through their recovery and they start to get on the other side of things and realize that really what they're going through has been exploitation. And a lot of our survivors talk about that as well, that they just did not see themselves as that way. And it wasn't until long into their recovery, and they're actually getting onto the, really, making themselves whole again, that they realize, I was a victim. So,
in your 7+ years working together, are there specific cases that you both personally feel or each individually feel that have affected you more than another?
We had a case, young lady, beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous young lady. She was trafficked for a couple of years. By the end of her trafficking, you would not recognize her. You could tell she was obviously addicted to drugs, probably had some other medical issues. And in the beginning, she wouldn't work with us. She would fight with us. We'd try to interview her, and she'd slam the chairs and spit on the officers, and just didn't want to give up her boyfriend. And finally, she got away from him, and we were at a point where she was willing to work with us, and we were going to court.
How old was she? Sorry, at the time that
she was a minor. She was 16.
Okay.
And we were going to court, and the day before she was supposed to testify, she killed herself. And we all really believed that it was the trafficker who had threatened her, that if she went to court, he would do something. So that stuck with me. That's one of the hard ones.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
Similar situation, 15 going on 16 in the foster care system, runaway, ended up in a bad situation, exploited, sex trafficked for, multiple weeks, if not months, recovered. And, going through that process of recovery is so hard for them, because it, as Felicia mentioned, sometimes they're coming in and out of that recovery, but just seeing this young woman that, full of life and full of potential, and seeing herself and seeing her just start go through that recovery, but then relapses and goes back to the trafficker, and seeing that constant exploitation. And then the point is that, they age out of foster care, they turn 18. So now they're adults. So now we see them being exploited as adults, and it breaks your heart, because you're going like, I just wish there was something more I could do.
Right.
But that you're limited in what you can do. And the only thing you really can do is be there when they need the help and provide that help for them, and hope that at some point, that is the point that it turns where they realize, I need to get out. So.
Yeah.
And the difficulty that we face a lot of is adults have to make an outcry, really. Either that, or we have to have very solid evidence that force has been used. And a lot of times we don't necessarily have that. So we need them to say, I'm a victim, that something has happened to me. Mm-hmm. But because of the whole psychological aspect,
Right.
A lot of them don't.
Right. Yeah, it speaks to the power of human conditioning when you think about like how somebody who's raised from a very young age to think that this is what the world is, the way the world is, and then to be told as, 10 years later as a teenager that this is not how things are supposed to be, and you've experienced, trauma. Yeah. I'm sure accepting that must be hard. The reality is based in this, and so as it goes to show just how important conditioning is, and how raising somebody can really affect what they think is reality, and what's good and what's bad. The fact that they can't even recognize that this is bad, is the scary part. What can parents who are at risk of their child being taken away or sold into sex trafficking do to prevent it? Are there parents who recognize that my child is maybe who have their own issues that aren't able to be as present for their kids, but they're trying to help their child? What kind of resources are there for them, and is that common?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of parents that care about their kids, and they might just be in a situation where they're a single parent, they have to work, their child so education is huge. Making sure your child understands internet safety, because that's a big way that predators are getting in contact with young people. There's ways of monitoring, especially for the younger kids, monitoring their phone. There's applications like Bark and Guardian that you can put, which you can then see what conversations they're having with other people and monitor that and make sure that there aren't any red flags that come up with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess I want to talk about trafficking online because you mentioned that's a lot of your work is involved in online trafficking. I can imagine with the prevalence of social media, it's enabled traffickers to target individuals, especially minors, and remotely and covertly in one way. So how are traffickers using social media and mobile platforms to recruit and exploit minors into sex trafficking?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like you mentioned, they're on social media. Anything that a child has that has a chatting application, whether it be a gaming system or whatever, there are going to be online predators there waiting and wanting to chat with that child. A lot of the social media, our children are very much used to putting anything and everything about their lives on social media, and that's what the traffickers and the child predators. Online predators look for. They look for those vulnerabilities within that child and try to prey on those vulnerabilities, like Felicia had mentioned. Like, they're saying like how bad their parents are and that their parents don't love them. Well, then the trafficker and the online predator saying, well, I would never treat you that way. You're so beautiful. I would just love you to death. Just like you would be, so much better with me than you are with your parents. Why don't you come with me? And those are situations where are very difficult because the child doesn't have the same lived experience as an adult. So they don't see the nuances of the grooming. And that's what it comes to. It's a grooming process for these individuals. Sometimes that grooming can take place in a day. Sometimes it's multiple months that it goes on with the child, where the trafficker is grooming the child. And these are tough situations because, a parent can do everything they can to try to protect their child online, but you can't cut the child off from being online. I mean, you can try, but it's, they go to school and their friends have, smartphones or whatever, and then they have applications at school that they're able to use. So it's very difficult. I think Felicia had made some great point. One thing also is, man, just have those, like she talked about, have those conversations with your children.
Yeah.
Make sure those are open conversations. Mm-hmm. And the main thing that we talk to parents about is like, if your child comes to you and says, hey, look, I've had this risky situation online, don't overreact, because once you overreact, that child is not going to feel comfortable, like I can go to my mom or dad again to talk to this because this is the way they overreacted last time.
Yeah. And also believe them.
Yes.
Because we do see instances where kids will come forward and say, Uncle Joe did this, and the parents don't believe them. So it's very important to listen to what your child's saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole disciplining of children is tough because as parents, you're trying to discipline your kids. So, I've had instances where, my daughters come up to me saying, don't tell mommy this. Yeah. And to me, this like raises these flags in my head because even though she's like extremely honest and she doesn't even lie about tiny things. Like she'll say, we're like, did you play on the iPad today? She's like, no. And then she comes back and say, yes, I did. So, that gives me some hope, but at the same time, it's hard because you're trying to make sure that they understand that there's consequences to actions that are to bad actions, but also in situations like this where they feel like they did something bad, even though they didn't, that might not make them want to open up to you. So I think, like you said, explaining to them the situation, how this is not a normal situation, and try to give them instances, online chatting, or when if someone tries to touch you, or someone tries to say, to have you take off your clothes in front of somebody else, these situations that raises flags to them so that they can come talk to you about it and let them know that you'll never be upset in situations like that. And you always want them to be open about it.
And sexting is a danger of the online issue as well, because you get a predator who gets a child to send a nude photograph. They can then use that as blackmail. They can say, now you're going to do this for me, or I'm going to spread this around your school, or I'm going to give this to your friend.
That's prevalent.
Yeah, we see that.
Yeah. And there's some great resources out there, that are age appropriate resources for children. So a parent doesn't have to take it all on themselves. They can, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has a great online safety course.
What's it called?
National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have called NetSmart. It's a great program to go in and really walk along, with your child, and y'all go through it together and kind of talk about it. And it's very, it kind of opens up to the child, how great online access is, but also there's the inherent dangers that come along with it. But it plants it in a situation that it's easy for that child to recognize and understand. And it also helps that parents to have those more in-depth conversations, like you said, with your child, and talk about the online safety aspect of things. So,
And when it comes down to finding predators online, what data and information are you privy to in order to find, like, say there's a child who's come to a parent saying that this person's been trying to, groom me, and not in their words, obviously, but talk to me. How can you get access to data from just a legal standpoint?
We have such great partnerships with a lot of the larger social media platforms and things like that, and they're very proactive trying to prevent online grooming. They self-initiate a lot of leads based off some of the things that they're seeing occurring across their platform and report that to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who in turn reports it to local law enforcement. So we see that being, of course, it's mandated, right? They have to do it, but still, that's a great opportunity to us work alongside some of these tech giants that are really, unfortunately, having their platform being used in this manner. But the internet in its anonymity is so hard to break down.
You want anonymity, but at the same time, like, for example, when a kid signs up for, say, Instagram, they have to consent whether they're younger than 18 or not. I would assume, for example, I could be completely off, but if they say they're younger than 18, they're 13 or whatever, I think 13 is the cutoff or something, they are their messages monitored, for example, at that younger age?
Well, I think they limit the people they can chat with.
Okay.
So, like, for instance, if they go on and say they're young, so you're not going to have a 40-year-old being able to chat with a 13-year-old that's online, if they actually are honest about their age.
Right.
But the problem is...
what kid's going to say they're 13 when they can say they're 18 and have the privileges of being able to do everything an 18-year-old can do?
And it's vice versa. I mean, we have predators going on posing as children, and convincing other children, hey, I'm 15 too, and, let's talk, whatever it may be.
Is that just as prevalent? I mean, it's just a mixed bag.
And now with artificial intelligence and the way that can be manipulated to for a variety of different reasons, brings in a whole nother layer of complexity to what we're dealing with.
Picture generation. You could create an entire fake persona with pictures and create this person that's grooming.
It is. It's hard. We have so many that are now able to create videos, AI-generated videos, so they can create an AI-generated video of a child looking like they're the child talking to this other child, and that they're exploiting. And it's like, it's hard to we're always behind. I guess it seems like that technology is moving so fast, and we're trying to catch up to it. And I think we're doing a good job, but it's moving so fast, and this AI technology has just exploded so quickly on us, and it's really made it difficult that now we're even seeing AI generated child sexual abuse material, where it's not a real child, but it looks like a real child, and you have online predators sharing that back and forth with one another.
And the purpose of this is just for their own just to have for their own sick.
Yeah. Well,
fantasies.
I mean, that's just, it meets their needs, for their sexual gratification to have that picture of that child to use. And it's, these are difficult situations for us, because when we intercept that, and so we don't know if this is a child that's being exploited or if it's an AI generated picture. And thankfully tech is coming alongside law enforcement to try to help break down some of those barriers and really bring us alongside to better prepare us and equip us to combat this, because it's starting to ramp up, and it's getting, unfortunately worse for us, because that's what we're starting to see a lot of. So
Yeah, and also I don't know if there's any work being done directly with like the like OpenAI or any other AI platforms to help restrict what the algorithm is able to produce as far as images is concerned.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there are some implications that they're trying to, but some of the individuals that have access to this are able to override,
Right.
certain
they know
restrictions.
how the algorithm thinks,
Yeah.
and they can talk their way around it, the learning language model.
One other thing that we're seeing is these situations where they're taking the child's face and placing it on a picture of a nude body, right? To meet that, that satisfaction for them. And there have been some cases that have gone forth, and here recently, here locally, there was one that a young, I think she was 15 or 16 at the time, but it was another classmate that had done it, was taking her face and putting on a nude photo and then sharing it across the school. Well, that's devastating to her, because what does she do now? Because all of these, all of her classmates have this, what they believe is a picture of her. And it wasn't, this other student had just done this, and
ruin her life, essentially.
And that's the issue that we have. I mean, we have, children doing it to other children. We have, we have children that are creating their own child sexual abuse material for a variety of purposes. We've seen them on OnlyFans, where you're selling content. We see them on other platforms where there's some type of video application where they can actually chat with somebody, and the predators is paying them to do certain things. I mean, it's just.
And OnlyFans isn't monitoring that kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, the problem is like if you have a 15, 16, 17-year-old, but they don't appear that young yet, and they're going on and saying, hey, I'm really 18, I'm 19.
Yeah.
I mean, our pornography, is the same way. The pornography industry is dealing with the same issues. There have been a host of situations where minors, had to either use false identifications or whatever it may is to get into that industry. And then after it comes out, the porn industry is trying to retract that from the internet. But once it's out there, it's almost impossible to get it back. And it's like you just have these situations that are very difficult, and it's just a situation where I think we continue to need all the partnerships we can, education-wise, with tech companies and stuff like that, to come alongside and really help us, fight this, because it is truly an evil, that we have children being exploited like this. So,
how much of the work that you're doing is preemptive versus reactionary? For example, like going out there trying to find, like to catch a predator, where you like essentially go undercover as someone, versus spending time just trying to light out fires all day.
Yeah.
We do both.
Yeah.
We do a lot of operations where we go undercover and try to find juveniles that are online and try to bring them to us so we can recover them. But then a lot of our stuff comes in through tips and things from CPS or AFC or different places that just say, this is a red flag.
Yeah. How much of it is online versus like stuff like coming in through CPS and stuff like that? How much effort and again, the goal is to try to save as many kids as possible, right? So how much of an effort would be made towards, say, focusing on online prevention and preventing those crimes from happening versus what's already happening through, say, CPS or foster care, stuff like that?
Trafficking just probably doubled at least when the internet came about. It's so easy just to go online and purchase somebody.
Because online is like, I would imagine, like you said, it's doubled. Online seems like the first step in grooming and getting, because there's no physical contact that's been made yet, right? So there has to be some sort of, like, for these groomers or people who traffic, some sort of logical, like, formula that they're taking in order to get to physically get to this child that they're
Well,
trying
and
to
there's
get
some
to.
traffickers that post their victims on sex sites. So a person who's looking for commercial sex can go onto one of those sites and make a date and then go meet that person.
So, and those are blacklisted sites, obviously. So
No, I mean these are what are deemed escort service sites. These
but they just look like they're older, so that they can say that they're 18 or above 18. Is that the idea?
Sometimes they may not even put their photo on there, or sometimes they may use somebody else's photo. It's not that they even put the victim's photos out there, especially if they are a minor. A lot of times they're not even putting their photos on there; they're putting somebody else's photos. I can tell you based off what Felicia talked about being proactive and things like that. We do a lot of what we deem demand reduction initiatives, where we're focusing on those individuals that are going out and purchasing commercial sex. And there are thousands of ads being posted on escort service sites just here in the North Texas region. I mean, you can go on an escort service site and it is basically, what a buyer deems as a buffet. Like I can go in here and pick what I want if I'm looking for a black female, and you can actually look for specific things, and that's what they're doing. It just gives them open access to basically, preview what they're looking at buying, purchasing sex from this person, and being able to identify like, oh, well, this is what I want for today. But in Tarrant County alone, in September of 2021, the state of Texas was the first state in the country to make purchasing of sex a felony offense, first-time offense, because they understand, sex trafficking would not exist if it wasn't for the demand side of things. So they felt that by making a felony offense, hopefully we can curtail some of the demand, and thus, if there's less demand, there should hopefully be less trafficking.
Right.
But I can say from what our perspective is and what we've worked so closely on some of these initiatives, it's like just in the last 3 years, from September of 21 to September 24, there have been over 800 individuals in Tarrant County alone arrested for solicitation of prostitution. And that's only because that's all we had time to do.
Right.
Like if we could run those operations 24/7, I mean, you would easily quadruple, if not multiply that by 10, And again, that's the only issue is that we're dealing with is like, we can only do so much because then we had to deal with all the other stuff that comes along with that arrest. Right. So we're only getting to so many, but I mean, it's just, the demand is so strong for commercial sex, and it is just outrageous,
Now, I'm not promoting solicitation, but there's a difference between, someone looking for, like, going to Vegas and looking for an escort versus, and that's an adult, versus someone comes to them, oh, this is not the person you wanted. Here's a minor. Like I would imagine, I could be wrong, but I would imagine that there's people who have a clear understanding between like what is morally right and morally wrong. And if you're, if like you said, that a lot of times they're disguising who these people are.
The difficulty, though, is that even with the adults, you can't be 100% sure they're doing it willingly. I mean, they're going to act like they're doing it willingly, because if they don't, they're going to be beat by their trafficker.
Right.
But you don't know for sure. That person might be forced into doing what they're doing.
Right. Right. It's not like it's not like the person who's prostituting, usually females, obviously prostituting themselves, are going out there on their own. They have an organization, either like a pimp or whatever it is, that's like grouped and organized them together. So it's not like she's doing this it's not like, say, as innocent, I guess you'd comparatively, as like, say, OnlyFans, someone who's managing their own page. Because I know in those cases that there are also the same kind of thing where there's, essentially pimps for OnlyFans, where they're basically have their managers essentially that are managing them but taking a percentage of their cuts, and who knows what kind of manipulation is going on there.
Yeah. Well, like Felicia's saying, I mean, the whole idea that a individual is purchasing somebody for sex in itself is morally wrong, right? I mean, because that buyer looks at that person as a commodity. Look, I just bought an hour. I get to do what I want to you for an hour, right? When we talk to survivors, they're talking about some of the worst abuse has come at the hands of a buyer. We have cases where buyers, physically assaulted, sexually assaulting victims. And unfortunately, there have been buyers that have murdered, those individuals that are in commercial sex. We're dealing with those cases, more and more where you have these individuals that are meeting victims online and then, murdering them at some point during that. Whatever the reasoning why, we don't know, but the fact of the matter is that those situations are occurring. But again, the assaults, the sexual assaults, and, sometimes, if we think about it from the perspective as, that person that is selling themselves highly likely does not want to do that. They're, when you talk to most survivors, and there's some studies out there that talk about survivors, when they talked about that, they said like 90, close to 90%, like if they could have left the lifestyle, which is what prostitution referred to, they would have. But there were certain factors that it came into play that they just weren't able to do it, whether there was a trafficking situation or there was other exploitative factors in their lifestyle. A lot of our victims and survivors, have trauma from child sexual abuse, that they're dealing with that has caused them to, find themselves in these situations, oftentimes. But the fact of the matter is, though, is that for a person to say, like, you know what, I'm going to go buy sex today and then just get online and make an agreement to meet somebody in a hotel or somewhere else and give them $100 to have sex with them, the idea of it being a consensual agreement, is rarely the case. There's something always going on typically with that victim that's led them to that position. So.
Yeah, and I want to talk about morality on a sense, because with the implementation of like online, not sex, like prostitution, online sex prostitution, but something like OnlyFans. I want to touch back on that, where there's this big, large community of girls who have gone into OnlyFans out of their own volition, where the community is huge now. Like I'm on YouTube and I see these podcasts about these girls who are on OnlyFans, and they're, and it's the podcasts sometimes I watch are more conservative in nature, but so they're talking about they're trying to understand like, why are you doing this? And there's some sort of social or some sort of argument about social freedom for a woman in general to be able to go online and sell her body essentially online to viewers, and it's become almost a socially accepted kind of norm. To me, that just propagates things like that from happening. So why do you estimate that this is happening? Obviously, the internet's a tool for everyone to use, but this is becoming extremely prevalent today. But more importantly, why has it become societally okay for this to happen? Especially in the younger community who think that this is okay. Like, this is my body, I'm free to do what I want with it, so it's okay for me to do with it. But there's underlying issues with that. Again, this is more of a personal moral issue, but why don't you each kind of give your opinion on that?
There's a lot happening in society where girls are being encouraged to do this sort of thing. And even with the porn industry, young kids, 8-year-olds are seeing porn now. And sometimes that's what they think is healthy relationships. And so, they grow up with this idea, and then somebody says, hey, I'll pay you if you do this. Well, that's just a benefit.
Right.
So they kind of, a lot of young people are they just don't have healthy examples at home to know what a good relationship is.
Yeah. And I think, like Felicia saying, the hypersexualization of society now. I mean, everything our children are being exposed to has sexual innuendos usually tied into it. What shows they watch, some commercials. I mean, just it's all over the board.
Music industry.
And, as she mentioned, pornography is such a driving force for what is causing what we believe, and some studies are going on, what is driving really to what the demand for sex trafficking is, because most of our buyers, when they're willing to talk to us about like, okay, what has led you to this point? Because we have a fantastic group that's coming alongside us that are trying to provide resources for these buyers to get really at the root cause of like, what led you to buying today? What led you to getting online, risking, arrest, risking your own safety to come meet with somebody that you have no idea who they are to purchase sex. And majority of them say, well, I mean, they're addicted to pornography. That pornography started and they watched it and it gratified them to a point. Well, then it got to a point where pornography is not gratifying anymore. So they want to act out what they're watching. Well, sometimes they may have a partner and they're not willing to do that, or they don't have a partner. So they're going out and purchasing at that point to act out on some of these fantasies that they've seen, through pornography. And it really is starting to, rear its ugly head, the explosion of pornography and the billion-dollar industry that it is, and the ease, like Felicia mentioned, the ease at which children can access it. If they have a smartphone, they're accessing it. There's been some laws put in place to try to block, do some age verification things, but a lot of that's being worked around, through various sources. But it's just a difficult situation, what we find ourselves in, just based off the way that almost everything that a child, whether they watch on TV or something like that, music, everything, there's usually some sexual undertones to it. And it's hard, it's hard to look at that and realize that, how do we prevent that from happening? Because again, parents are out there doing their best to try to shield their child from this.
Well, a lot of times they don't know enough about technology. I'll say I was around when dial-up was around, and porn was started there. I found pornography online when I was 13. And I understand that parents didn't even know at the time what they could do to stop it. You couldn't do anything to stop it. You could to a certain extent, but there's only limited things you can do. So, I'm thinking ahead, like how in 10 years, whatever, or less, when my kids are getting more and more exposed to that and they're hitting maturity, and how can I keep them aware of the situation? I don't want to shield them from anything, but I want them to be educated about it and understand that something like, especially boys who think that pornography is just something that's just just a short-term gratification, dopamine hit, and understanding that there are consequences that come with that, real addiction issues that come with it, especially today.
So there's a lot of good data and information and resources for parents on a site called Culture Reformed. It really dives into the idea of pornography and its link to trafficking and things like that.
Culture Reformed. All right, I'm going to link that in the video. I want to just switch gears, and we talked about immigration a little bit earlier. One stat I came across, and you might be familiar with it or not, and could debunk it, but it's 30% of sex trafficking victims in Texas are from Mexico or Central America. I don't know if the stat is true or not. It's one that I found online. But how does being close to the U.S.-Mexico border affect trafficking here in Texas, especially for immigrants and children traveling alone?
I don't think what we have seen, we don't see that statistic showing up in that manner. But again, we're talking about a very underreported, situation. So, it's very possible that, that data, again, could have some truth to it. But that it's really hard for us to pinpoint exactly what the immigration aspect really has done for us in regards to trafficking. What we do know, again, is that the immigrant community is at risk of exploitation for a variety of reasons. Most likely is because of their immigration status, and that's what the trafficker is using to exploit them. Like Felicia had mentioned, we have smuggling cases where it turned into a debt bondage situation, like she mentioned, where they're being smuggled across. Well, now they owe the traffickers $10,000 to pay off that smuggling debt. And so they're stuck in the perpetual cycle of, well, now you owe me $100 for rent and for food and this and that. So they're never getting out of these debt bondage situations. And then we also have those traffickers on the immigration side that are threatening their family members that are back in the country which they originated from. Is
this a federal or a local issue as far as that goes? Is like are there a task force dealing with immigration specific crimes that resulting from illegal immigration, or is that something? Because ICE is enforcing immigration to a certain extent, but what task force or what department is involved in specifically focusing on aspects related to crime?
Well, when it comes to trafficking, a victim's immigration status does not matter. If they are a victim of human trafficking, then we as law enforcement and our federal partners investigating that to the fullest extent and actually providing some resources in place to actually help that victim as far as their immigration status is concerned. So, I mean, that is not something that we really look at and take into account as far as, is that a deterrent from us, investigating this or not? So, from all perspectives, from human trafficking, immigration status, it doesn't have any bearing on it.
No, I meant more along the lines if there's specific organizations that are.
Well, we do, both of our units investigate, trafficking related cases that involve immigrant population. Our Homeland Security Investigative Task Force, the North Texas Trafficking Task Force, does a great job of both, domestic and, those type of immigration status or immigrant victimization type situations. So the task forces are there to combat human trafficking regardless, other immigration crime that may occur and things of that nature. There are other task forces that are forced around that are separate from human trafficking that focus their efforts on that, whether it be narcotics or things of that nature, to go after those cartel members and cartels that are bringing narcotics and flooding the narcotics into the area. So there's a variety of different task forces that investigate a variety of different immigration crimes across the board. But when it comes to victimization, immigration status is usually not something that is something that would put that investigative capacity into a federal realm or a state realm. So, I mean, both are investigating it. The only thing is, from the federal perspective, is that if it is a state investigation, the federal perspective can come in and help again with the immigration status for the victim and stuff like that. So,
right. You mentioned that one way that traffickers target immigrants is through a debt to get them across. What other means are they using to traffic children besides that?
Well, from the perspective of just children alone, I mean, sometimes those situations are the family itself is in a situation where they're being forced to put that child into a trafficking situation, and a lot of times that's originating in their country of origin. That child is being introduced into that trafficking situation there, and then brought into the United States from that perspective. There are situations where once they get here, that child is being introduced into a trafficking situation, but most of the time it's through a force, fraud, mostly force or threat of force situation that's causing that parent to introduce that child into that situation.
A lot of those originating countries, it's because of poverty. So they don't have enough money to feed their family, and a trafficker says, I'll give you this much money if you give me your child, and they do.
Yeah, and those are tough situations. We have situations where we have the immigrant population coming to the United States because what they're fleeing, even though their exploitation is so horrendous here, unfortunately, it's better than what they came from.
Right.
And that's how do you combat that?
Right. Well, I was going to ask. I think a lot of obviously illegal immigrants come to have a better life.
Yeah.
And therefore, they're going to do whatever they can to not report themselves if there is some sort of a crime, to them or to a loved one, because they don't want to get deported.
Right.
So, what can we do to curtail this effort of immigrants being sex trafficked, considering that it's being so probably hugely underreported, probably way more underreported than citizens issues?
I think education and awareness campaigns, especially along the border, are important in their languages, and also screening processes. So as they're coming across, being able to screen them and see, is this person a victim of trafficking or not?
I mean, from my understanding, if they're coming in, but if they're coming across illegally, are they being screened?
There had been situations where they have encountered, immigrant authorities at the border, and they've been allowed in there in a process of going through asylum and things of that nature, and allowed to stay here until that hearing is held. One other thing that we have seen been very productive is getting, and this really law enforcement, probably not so prevalent in this because of the stigma between law enforcement and an immigration status, but our victim service provider doing a great opportunity of going into the communities, where the immigrant community and talking to them about trafficking and talking to them and make them aware of what their rights are and things of that nature. Because a lot of times, like Felicia said, they're not even aware of what their rights are.
Right.
They're being told something totally different than what the actuality is. So that's what their trafficker is using for that exploitative measure. They're telling them that you have no rights here, and then if you make an outcry, you're being deported. Well, that's not the case, right? So our victim service provider are doing a tremendous job going into those communities and getting hold of those stakeholders in those communities to spread that word, to raise that awareness and that education within that community. As Felicia said, that's key to combating this, because if we have victims that have an understanding of what their true rights are and realize what they've been told has been a total lie up until this point, then hopefully that gives us the opportunity, whether they come forward to law enforcement or if they just reach out to a victim service provider to seek services to remove themselves from that exploitative situation. And that's key for us too. I mean, we definitely want to prosecute the trafficker. We want to arrest the trafficker. We want to hold them accountable. But our first priority is the victim. We need to remove them from that exploitative lifestyle. And we have victims that are willing to do that, but they necessarily don't want to involve themselves in a criminal investigation. And we honor that because we just want to make sure they have the resources available to them to remove themselves from that situation. So,
great. Thank you. I wanted to talk about the media. We were talking about the media earlier and the underreporting in the media. Why do you think sex trafficking is still overlooked in mainstream media, despite how prevalent it is?
I think the media is actually getting better. The problem is it's still such a politicized topic. When you talk about the border and things, it becomes a political issue.
Right.
And again, there's that misunderstanding of what smuggling is as opposed to trafficking. And so a lot of times the focus gets shifted into the political issues and the smuggling issues. And
this is for on the immigration side, right? You're talking
right.
Yeah.
But we've had, with Five Stones at least, we've had more media reaching out to us, wanting to bring more awareness to the community. And so we've had some good media partners lately.
Yeah. I think it's, I think in the current state of, with the fentanyl crisis and things like that, I think it's kind of just getting lost in the shuffle of things. We kind of, when you look at what you see is, a lot of time it's immigration or fentanyl immigration, and then human trafficking comes in a third, but, the media, as Felicia said, I think has done a lot here in the North Texas region to really talk about what human trafficking is and what it looks like, and trying to help us dispel some of the things that are out there that aren't correct, that aren't right.
Right.
But I do think from the perspective of, what is the political thing for the day, with the election going on right now,
Sure,
it's all 100% election. Really, you don't see anything. And there are some cases that rise out of trafficking situations that make its way through the court systems that that get into the media mainstream and are reported on. But I think in actuality, we're doing the best we can, I think, as far as trying to put the word out there. But we would definitely love for the media to take a better stronghold of that and really push out, kind of like what we're doing today, right? To raise that awareness and raise that education about what trafficking is and what it isn't, and really what to look for. So
yeah, I think media is so, in general, people are so used to receiving media in these quick sound bites. Mm-hmm. And from what I'm learning today, it's just that this is a very convoluted, multifaceted, layered problem. Yeah. And the media likes to just say, this is the problem and this is the reason why. Yeah. And so it's easy to point to immigration because it's something that's, first of all, hot in the media today, but as you guys have both pointed out, that it makes up a small percentage of your efforts and the stats that you see working on a daily basis. So I think a big part of the reason why the media probably doesn't cover it is because it's so convoluted. They just don't even know where to start. Yeah. I think hopefully people who are involved in more long format discussions can help educate people and let people understand that how layered this situation is. You'd mentioned foster care earlier. A lot of trafficking victims have prior involvement with the foster care system. And I'm assuming that children have higher risks of being in living conditions that, with limited supervision, that traffickers could exploit. So how are children in foster care being safeguarded from being sold into sex trafficking?
So one of the great things about DFPS fairly recently is they developed a trafficking unit. So they actually have a team of people now, at least in our area, that are focused on identifying and responding to trafficking situations.
Wow.
Yeah. And we have great support from the governor's office and things of that nature to really put resources into these situations, especially through the Department of Family Protective Service to really enhance the protections there, to safeguard our children.
What are some of those?
Well, as Felicia talked about, these specialized units that actually are investigating those specific crimes and have an understanding of what those indicators may be when a potential victim is going through that exploited factors, and being able to pick that out. But they're also doing more screenings and things of that nature and really making a more robust system, when it comes to the foster care system and trying to ensure that, our children are protected, and it's hard. Don't get me wrong, because, unfortunately, there are not enough foster families out there for the children that are in the foster care system. So those that aren't in a foster family are ending up in some group home living and things of that nature. So that makes it difficult for that child to, not really have a family unit or a family to really take hold of and really, provide that love and support for. The Department of Family Protective Services, like a lot of entities that are dealing with child welfare cases or not child welfare, but child advocacy and the child care system when it comes to foster care, they're extremely overworked, and they're just, it's to a point where, we see that there's this level of like, okay, we're starting to level out now where, there's the opportunity for more resources to be applied to better enhance their effectiveness and things of that nature. So I think that's also been a problem here, that we've dealt with is that, the groups that we deal with, when it comes to DFPS, they are extremely overworked and they just don't have the resources. But thankfully, there's such a strong, and, Felicia probably doesn't give herself enough credit for this, but for the Five Stones Taskforce to be created, and we're going in our 10th year now?
10th year.
For her to have that foresight back, in 2014 to look at that and say, look, when it comes to human trafficking and combating human trafficking and sex trafficking, this needs to be a community engagement, not just an individualized law enforcement or a victim service provider. We need to collaborate together. And the collaboration that occurred in Tarrant County started with what Felicia created with the Five Stones Task Force, and it has expanded since then to the point where Tarrant County now, based off the foundation that Felicia has built, is really looked at as a model for across the state and the country about how to address human trafficking within that community. And it's all about community engagement, collaboration, and bringing all the partners to the table and making sure that everybody has the seat that needs to be there. Everybody knows what their roles are, and working together to help the victims. And it's, again, she doesn't give herself enough credit for
Felicia,
that. But I was like,
what motivated you to start this 10 years ago?
So actually, the seed of the idea happened back in 2007. I was working in a different city department, and we had a women's health initiative. Our whole focus was reducing infant mortality in Tarrant County. And we were allowed to do special projects as long as they were health related. And so a coworker and I decided we were going to look at the health impact of prostitution. In our eyes, that's adult prostitution. So it was a shock when we started interviewing people that we discovered many of the women we talked to had started when they were juveniles. And that was my introduction to trafficking. And it just stuck with me. And it was something that just bothered me so much. The timing was bad. The city was going through layoffs. We lost my entire department. So fast forward to 2014, and I was working for the police department, and I had an opportunity to talk to the chief at that point in time. And I told him, I said, this is still a passion for me. I would really like to see some way that the community and the police department can work together to better fight this crime. And he blessed it. He said, go do it. And so that was the beginning. It was just a handful of stakeholders in a small office. And that was the beginning of Five Stones.
I mean, how do you go about even starting that? You obviously, build a website, but how do you even raise awareness about, and you're wanting people to come share their stories and be an advocate for it, but how do you even reach out and start that? I'm sure it's multifaceted, but what were the biggest hurdles that you came across?
Really, it was Tarrant County is just amazing for collaboration. And you don't see that everywhere. But people here, they want to work together. And so it was a lot of word of mouth. It just started with people hearing about it, saying, I want to be part of this conversation. I want to be part of this effort. We eventually grew in 2016. We became an official arm of the Fort Worth Police Department because we had about 40 people meeting on a regular basis, all wanting to talk about this topic and fight it in some manner.
And these were all like volunteers?
These are all volunteers. We had no budget. And then today we've got between 70 and 90 people that all come together to collaborate, to work together on this issue.
And how are volunteers, because I want to educate listeners here to see what they can do to help, because a lot of people, I don't know what I wouldn't know what to do to help, aside from what I can do for my own children, much less other minors. What can people do to help when they volunteer? How are they helping?
So that's the biggest question that I always get is, how can I volunteer? What can I specifically do to help this issue? So Five Stones has actually developed, it's a 2-page resource of just specific ways people can get involved. It runs from anything from maybe I just want to write a check to one of the partner agencies, or maybe I want to become a 24/7 advocate for victims and survivors, or maybe I just want to write cards of encouragement to a survivor and their family.
Can they get direct access to the people that you guys have rescued and get involved with them and help them in any way, shape, or form?
So, again, it's not rescue. We recover people.
Sorry, I'm so sorry about that. I'm sorry.
And there are opportunities with some of our partner agencies that you can actually become an advocate or a mentor or lead a small group. Men have a role as well in some of these areas where we have cyber patrols and things like that. So there are very direct ways people can get involved if they want to.
That's great. What is the website, or how can people contact you?
So our website is www.fivestonestaskforce.org.
Awesome, and I'm going to link it in the video. You mentioned budget earlier, and again, I don't know if this number's true, but again, $58 million I've read has been allocated for anti-trafficking efforts in Texas. Do you think that there's enough financial resources, and if not, what other kind of financial resources are needed? And also beyond the financial, what kind of resources do we really need to do more, like you said?
Yeah, as far as $58 million for the entire state of Texas,
doesn't seem like much.
It doesn't. One of the things that I think is so important for us, and Felicia and I, are very much about this, is that from a local government perspective, we have a funding source, that helps provide the resources, not extensive, but the collaborative effort enhances that to really do a great job of combating human trafficking from this law enforcement perspective. But it's our victim service providers and the other organizations that are providing direct resources to victims. Those are the ones that are really in dire need of the financial support, because majority of their funding source are grants and applications through both federal and state level. But it's also private donors coming forth and really providing those additional resources and that funding to help provide those valuable resources for our victims. And it's really, I wish I could just put a number on it and say, hey, if we had $1 billion,
right,
then but it's ever evolving, and we all have learned to work with what we have. And really, again, through collaboration, making that the force multiplier to really fill in the gaps where maybe our funding issues are falling short, right? So, but again, our victim service providers and those other organizations are providing direct support for victims, those are the ones that are really the ones that we like to really see funding increase for, to really provide those. Because from our perspective, at least I'll say this on my perspective, law enforcement interaction with the victim is often just a short snippet of their long-term recovery, and it's that long-term recovery that is so important. And that's where these other organizations step in and provide that. Because if it was not for them, we don't know where we would be,
Right.
because there would be no direct services for victims. And once that recovery is done, then what? Because
Right.
that's often
that's
the question.
The toughest part is
Yeah.
like you have a case to deal with, but once you've kind of not closed the case, but essentially you've helped these people out, and then at the end of the day, like you said, so many people kind of go back to their captors, or so you've got it's a continual process of following up and nonstop.
Right.
I mean, this is anybody who gets involved. I can't imagine how you wouldn't take this home with you every single day. I mean, and make it a mission in your life. And I can see how it must be very hard for people who, honestly, I was trepidant with our meeting today because it hit so hard for me having two kids, and understanding that it's an emotionally heavy situation, and that to be able to invest a lot of yourself in order to help other people has got to be a huge thing in the first place, because we also, as individuals, have so much going on in our own personal lives.
Yeah.
I will say, in addition to funding, obviously, one thing that we really need is more men involved in the effort. Unfortunately, it's disproportionately women that are involved in a lot of our causes, and men tend to drive the demand side. And so we really need more men as mentors and examples to help keep other men from doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, we have a great organization, the NET, that has a Men Against Sexual Exploitation group. And that's their primary focus, is to address demand for sex trafficking. And
Is that local? Okay.
And they're the group I mentioned that are coming alongside law enforcement during demand reduction initiatives and actually speaking to those individuals that are arresting to try to understand what is the driving force behind this and providing resources around that, for those individuals. And they, as Felicia said, they need more men to step into those roles to provide that support. But I think that's such a great initiative that we can really throw significant amount of support behind, because of what it's doing for trying to drive down the demand and really trying to have men understand that their actions have consequences beyond what they think they do.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hugest thing.
And not just that, on those types of decisions, is that the underlying root cause of this fatherless epidemic, where there's so many absent fathers in the household, plays a huge role on the downstream effects of this, 10 years down the road for those kids, for those boys that don't have their fathers, and for the girls that don't have their fathers around.
Yeah.
So, well, guys, thank you so much for coming today. I really appreciate you
thank you.
lending your expertise and talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.